All right, so slide 12 is one of those questions that combines momentum and energy. So I don't think I should need to go over part 1 at all, but part 2 we definitely need to talk about because it's asking for the momentum halfway to its maximum height. So first of all, you have to consider, well, what does it mean by halfway? Does it mean half the time up or half the height? And I think what's implied here is half the height. So we know the initial velocity is 15, and the final velocity when it gets to the maximum height would be 0. And so what it's asking us to find is what is the momentum halfway in between at this point here. So some steps in mind. We know the mass, we know the initial velocity. Why did I write final velocity? This is the initial velocity of 15 meters per second. And so we can figure out how much energy we have at the beginning, which is just half the mass times velocity squared. So we plug in our numbers, and I get a nice clean number of 8. Now, it starts off at the ground level, so our initial height is 0. That means our initial potential is 0. There's no springs involved, so that means the total mechanical energy we have at any point in time has to add up to 18. So when we get to the top, there's 0 kinetic energy, and that means we have all of this potential. So we could solve for the height here by doing that gravitational potential energy divided by mg, and then use half the height in the calculation to figure out what the velocity is. Ultimately, what we're trying to figure out is what is the velocity? There's an easier way, much easier way. So if I know the total mechanical energy has to add up to 18, then that means at the halfway point, the kinetic energy has to be half, and the potential energy has to have half. So our potential is equal to 9, and our kinetic has to be equal to 9. In other words, it has to add up to 18, and they have to be equal to each other. So all you have to do is divide the total energy by 2. What we're going to use is the kinetic energy to find velocity. So velocity is the square root of 2 times the kinetic energy divided by the mass. So our kinetic energy is 9, and we know our mass is 0.16, so we'll plug in and get the velocity that way. So I'm going to do square root of 2 times 9 divided by 0.16. And that's going to give me 10.61. 10.61 meters per second. That's not our answer. That is the velocity. What the question's asking for is what's the momentum halfway up? So our momentum halfway up, let's change to a different color. Momentum is mass times the velocity, and we're using the velocity halfway up. So my mass is 0.16, and my velocity is 10.61. And that's going to come out to a momentum equal to 1.697. That would be my answer, 1.697. What happened? Wait.